If psychology and pop culture had a baby, they'd call it Shrink Tank.
There is a sort of pendulum that's swinging back and forth where we kind of go from one extreme.
And I think there's an element of truth to
Because
this.
I have something interesting later in the show that will make you feel very weird. From Nashville and Charlotte, this is the Shrink Tank Podcast. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dave Verhagen in Nashville. We have a fantastic show for you. Our trending topic today is the psychology of Avengers Endgame. A big show. But first, we're going to get to our Charlotte panel. Dr. Emma Kate Wright is here. Emma Kate, did you have a favorite? We're going to talk about the movie in some of the depth later, but did you have a favorite character or characters from Endgame?
From Endgame? Well,
Or just from the whole MCU?
Oh, okay. So I love Iron Man and his character. I also am... Well, yeah, no, he's probably my favorite. I also just like the Spider-Man. So.
Do you like the Spider-Man because Tom Holland's playing him?
I think
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, he just
like
does a really good job with it.
What I mean is, like, I wasn't a huge Spider-Man fan until Tom Holland, and then he's, like, become very endearing now. The character's very endearing to me.
Yeah, I didn't like Toby, what's-his-face, as... Maguire, yeah, I didn't
Good old
like
Toby,
him at all.
what's-his-face.
Yeah, as the Spider-Man. But
I actually liked all the actors who played Spider-Man in the past decently enough, but they were fine. This kid is just, he's got that sort of, that something special, that spark that's like, you're just very endeared to the guy.
He's got that something special.
He sure
Dave
does.
looks for in a young man.
Well, Frank Gaskell's here. Dr. Frank Gaskell is on the panel. Yes, sir. And same question to you. Favorite Marvel Comics or Cinematic Universe character?
Iron Man is hands down my favorite. However, I have a close, very bizarre second, which is the Scarlet Witch. I
Why
think
is that?
she is. I'm a big fan of X-Men, but just the power that she wields is fascinating to me, and she's also got that sort of dark element to her and the dark origins. So I just find her intriguing and her motives interesting. So yeah.
And I have found her superpower of changing her Sokovian accent over the movies to be mind-blowing.
Yeah, that is mind-blowing, man. She's taking some speech lessons.
And Jonathan Herley, you just heard him. He's our certified Asian who rounds out the panel. And Jonathan, favorite MCU character?
This is actually surprising to me, but over the course of the last 10 years, I have really grown to love the Captain America character. And in some ways, he starts out so like earnest and affable, and I've really appreciated the growth of his character and some of the themes and issues that he's had to work through throughout the films. And so to me, it's actually quite surprising that I feel a deeper connection to him than a lot of other characters. Like, I like Iron Man, but like snarky, sarcastic, like that would seem right up my alley, and I really do like that character in Robert Downey Jr., but I think it's more of the shock value that I find Iron Man so appealing, or excuse me, Captain America so appealing.
I am surprised by that because I would think he's too earnest for you. You're a pretty cynical guy by nature, or sarcastic guy by nature. So, yeah, that's surprising.
So why?
Go ahead.
Why is that your caricature?
Because I thought it'd be funny to have an Asian be Captain America around here, because we are taking over the world.
there he is.
So now your caricature finally matches your. Okay.
And just a little context. We have to always give context for Frank's
Yes.
random comments, but all of us have caricatures of us as superheroes at our office. Like at the door of our office, we have a created caricature of us, and Jonathan's is Captain America.
Well, originally I was going to be one of the characters from Doctor Strange, but of course we had all the white people play those characters in the movie, so that just didn't seem to fit to take it back.
I would say for me, Black Panther. I just love the character. I love the whole world of Wakanda and that whole royalty thing. And also, I'm kind of the opposite. I like Rocket, the raccoon. I think
Oh, yeah.
He is great.
I think he's.
Well, you also like dogs.
I do.
Yeah, you want him as
he's-
a pet and as a child.
Yeah.
I want him as a
You
pet.
just want to pet
and
him.
as yeah, and as my my sidekick. Well, every week Jonathan trolls around the internet and he finds a great story of psychology in the news for our first segment that we call
Being Human.
Well, Frank and everyone else, but Frank in particular, I found some research that really highlights the theory that watching porn might actually improve body self-image and acceptance. Now, the general assumption is that people watch pornography with beautiful, young, naked people with perfect bodies, and they become insecure about their own bodies. But does research advocate for watching porn? Listen to this. When people view porn as more realistic, they are more likely to view porn as having positive effects. So in men, this belief in porn's positive effects correlates with higher sexual self-esteem. In women, higher levels of genital self-esteem correlates with higher levels of sexual self-esteem and higher levels of sexual satisfaction. Women who feel better about their genitalia enjoy sex more. So, watching porn helps people love themselves, but in a
Oh my
different way
gosh.
than we might first assume.
So that was savage.
So, Frank,
Yes, sir.
I would love to get your genuine thoughts about this research on the positive impact of watching porn.
your genuine genital thoughts on this.
Well, I want to say one thing about this article to begin with, in that it felt a little more like an opinion piece than it did legitimate research. It's from Psychology Today, so there's that. I'm not slamming that, but it felt much more of an opinion piece, and the rundown was people who have conservative religious views tend to be much more conflicted, which you would sort of assume. But I actually spoke to a psychologist who specializes in this, and that there is truth that people who watch more amateur, realistic-looking people that are not perfect looking, that actually helps women feel more confident, and it kind of boosts self-worth. But it really boils down to this idea, and they speak to it in the article, that there's a porn website, which I will not mention, kind of surveyed its users and found the same idea that religious conservative people are much more conflicted. But I thought that was hilarious, that conservative religious people on a porn site are responding to a survey about how they feel conflicted about looking at porn, which I didn't really understand. But I think that's sort of the takeaway, is it boils down to kind of your conservative religious viewpoint as to whether that's going to be good for you or not.
Well, but I think the body image piece is what they were really trying to get at, because it's true. We have really high unrealistic standards in our media, regardless of what platform of media,
Right.
for what especially women are supposed to look like. And we'll probably talk about this with Thor and the Avengers, but there are standards for both males and females. So
True.
Wouldn't
Well,
it be
and-
ironic? Wouldn't it be ironic if, in the age of social media and all of arts and entertainment, that it is porn that helps to provide realistic body image for people to not have such unrealistic
Right.
expectations? Like, wouldn't that be the irony of all time? I feel bad about myself. Go watch amateur porn.
no,
But the other thing this article doesn't address is addiction and what that does to marriages and relationships and how unrealistic it is. And when teens are watching this stuff, that now they think this is a normal way of behaving in the bedroom. So I wish more of that
Or
had
the
been
office, or the
Yes,
library,
or the library,
or the bus stop.
on the back of the car.
Yeah. Well, I will say this.
I thought it was a somewhat flawed article that didn't really add a whole lot to the conversation.
Well, I will tell you, I don't really know how strong the research is, but even though it is a blog piece, it does cite and link to
Yes.
research. I mean,
There is some
it isn't
firm
pure
research.
opinion. Right. Yeah,
It's not pure opinion, correct.
right. So I think I just want to make the point that it's not just someone spouting off opinion.
True.
It's like they're trying to draw from this research. And I think some of this stuff is just, it's interesting if it'll be replicated. It's interesting if it'll shake out. Like, I think there was a recent study that said, one of the things that we've kind of assumed is that this generation of kids is reporting having less sex than previous generations at the same age when they're in high school and college. And that one of the assumptions has been that it's due to porn, that all these guys are just getting their needs met with porn. But there's actually at least one study that's suggesting that guys that look at a decent amount of porn actually are the ones who are still having sex. Like, it's not that's not
right.
the variable. So I don't know. I think some of these things are yet to be determined, but some of the stuff that we're finding is counterintuitive, I think.
Right. It's hard to tease out.
As it were. Well, if you have an opinion about this or a comment about it, we'd love to hear from
a
you.
link.
You can write us.
No links.
Or a link.
No links.
What
don't
helps
think
you feel
anyone
better
needs-
about yourself?
I don't think anyone needs trouble with a link to get to porn. I think the folks have figured that one out. But you can write us at feedback@shrinktank.com. And we're going to switch to our trending topic, which is the psychology of Avengers Endgame. And before we dive in, let me just say this is very spoilery. We're not going to hold back. So if you haven't seen the movie, then just put this on pause until you've seen it, because we're going to talk details. So the final chapter of this Marvel Cinematic Universe has already made a huge impact. Opening weekend, biggest ever of all time. It is going to be this box office juggernaut. Probably will end up being the top grossing film of all time. And it has gotten great reviews. At the time of this recording, it has a 95 on Rotten Tomatoes. It is critically acclaimed. It is acclaimed by the public. So it is definitely the movie of the moment. So let's just go around, and first, I want to get just quick reviews, opinions about the movie itself. Did you like it, love it, have mixed feelings? We'll start with Emma Kate.
So I absolutely love this film, and I cried a couple times, and there were some very tear-jerky moments there. And just the way that it all ended, it all came together, and there were some surprises in there, and I just was riveted, and it was so exciting to see the final moment of this story.
And I can attest to her crying as I was sitting next to her.
Oh, were you crying, Frank?
Anyway, I shed one tear and kept my throat from completely closing. Then I stood around awkwardly with our esteemed colleagues here, Emma Kate and Jonathan Hedderly, and I made it to my car to drive home by myself and ugly cried for 20 minutes. Ugly cried.
There's no such thing as pretty
Sobbing.
cry with you.
Could not handle it. Finally made it home, got in bed, thought about it again, and cried again. Cried and cried. That's the most emotional I've ever been about a movie. Absolutely
Wow.
the most. I was
Okay.
completely overwhelmed, and I'm seeing it again this weekend.
I'm going to come back to this in a second. I do have to ask a serious question about Frank, though. And you guys have to be honest about this. Did Frank fall asleep during the movie?
No,
No.
no, no.
I couldn't see.
No, he
okay.
was not.
No. I saw the
All right.
entire... But I did not fall asleep.
This is a routine practice for Frank to have a drink or two before a movie, get settled in, watch the movie, fall asleep, and then wake up at the end of the movie and give it a review.
No,
stands
because
up
Greatest
I-
thing ever.
I
Stands
went
up
to
and
the
says,
restaurant.
That movie sucks, or that's the best movie ever, or whatever it is. So
I went to a restaurant with Emma, Kate, and Hedderly for about 45 minutes before, and they can attest to everything I consumed.
All right. I'm
Wow.
just saying this
I really
is just
don't want that
Yeah.
responsibility.
No.
We're going to come back to Frank ugly crying in a minute. So, Jonathan, your quick review of the movie.
Well, I went and saw it opening night because I couldn't wait. So I saw it at 10 o'clock, which with previews and the film's 3-hour running time, I got home around 1:30 in the morning. And I loved it. I did. I saw it again Monday night with my colleagues here. And having spent 6 hours with it, it holds up to repeat viewing. I think it is for 3 hours, it's a tightly constructed film. There's really not a lot of fat. There's a lot of payoff. I think it's a superior film to Infinity War. I just think the pacing, the payoff, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It really is a better movie than I think it has the right to be. Like, I'm shocked how good I liked it.
I've seen it twice too. I hardly ever go see a movie twice in the movie theater. I saw it twice within a 3-day period. I think I loved it the first time. I think it was as good, if not better, the second time. And I'm somebody, I'll say two things that sound slightly contradictory, but the first is I think this whole MCU thing is the best total package achievement in cinematic history. You know, if you look at similar things like Harry Potter or James Bond or Lord of the Rings or even Star Wars in some respects, I think when you look at the whole kind of like crafting these 20-some films in a decade that all interweave and all have things dropped earlier, it's remarkable. That being said, I don't think every film within it is a knockout. Like, I think there are a couple of clunkers or weaker films. I would probably, out of those 21 films, I'd give maybe 5 solid A's. This is definitely a solid A. This for me was among the best. It's one of the better action films I've ever seen. So I'm with you. So, Frank, I want to go back to you. What moved you emotionally about the movie? What was it? This is where we're going to get a little spoilery, I'm sure.
Well, there were quite a few emotional moments. One was when Captain America picked up Thor's hammer and it just became worthy. That was
right.
Just an amazing transformation.
Very cool. Yeah.
And when, literally right now, my hair's standing up thinking about these moments, but when you think all is done and Doctor Strange and everybody comes through and the gateway is open and every single freaking character shows up, it hit this loyalty button and you can count on everyone when you're at your worst, that they're going to come back you up and sacrifice. And then finally, I just completely lost it with Iron Man because it symbolized not only did he die and he left his 4-year-old child and he did all these amazing things as a leader for this team, the entire universe is dead now. Like they're all gone. This whole experience is over, which I think I'm probably going to experience with Star Wars 9 because it's all going to be over, and it's really hard.
Emma Kate, you said you also got a little teary. What was the most moving pieces of this movie? What were the most moving parts of it?
I agree with some of the ones that Frank was just sharing. I also was really moved when there's a scene where Captain America observes Peggy Carter. And you just think about how with time travel, you're not supposed to interact and see each other, that sort of thing. And you could just see the desperate look in his eye where he just would have given anything to have been able to have a redo, essentially, and live that life with her. And so, obviously, at the end, we can assume that he did. And it was beautiful. And getting to see them dance together and just have a life, given all that he had sacrificed, I found that really special.
That part for me was also, that was probably it for me. Jonathan, did it hit you emotionally? I know you're dead inside, but did it hit you at all emotionally?
It did, but certainly not to the degree of Frank or most people, but I think the film does a very effective job of nurturing emotional payoffs and feeling not through exposition, but even quiet moments like Emma Kate's talking about, that getting so close to Peggy, and yet he's got a mission. He's got something that's of greater scope than his own personal desires. But for a man that has spent how many years out of his own time and not really to nurture that relationship, I found some of those moments very tender. And even the cold open with Hawkeye's family.
Mm-hmm.
I think the way they filmed that was more devastating. And just to see his confusion and that fear versus we've already seen through Infinity War what the effect is like to watch that the snapshot happen in real time. So I thought the filmmakers did a really good job of being restrained, but very effective in evoking emotion.
I was really moved by the interactions between Spider-Man and Iron Man.
Yes.
Because the parallelism of, like, in Infinity War, they're hugging and then Spider-Man evaporates and then he comes back and then hugs him again. And he's like, this is nice. And then
This is nice.
later at the end of that scene, when it's the end of Iron Man, like, it was very emotionally moving stuff there. Like, that was really cool. Also, the funeral scene, I think the way that was done. One of the things I love in movies, it's rare, but I consistently love this, even when it's hokey, and it wasn't hokey here, is what I would call the curtain call. So it's where you have a final scene near the end where they bring back all the characters. So they did this in Lord of the Rings. They did this in Titanic. They've done it in other major films and so the funeral was a curtain call. And I thought it was also done in a very cool, probably the best I've ever seen, very moving way. By the way, a little trivia. You're going through there and you see Ant-Man and you see Black Panther and his family. You see all these. And then there's one kid just standing there by himself. Do you know the background on that story, that the teenage kid?
Yeah.
You remember Iron Man 3, when Iron Man was... there was a kid that was sort of like his buddy taking care of him. Do you remember this?
Oh, I remember that. Wow.
Same character, same actor. It's the same actor.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That is great detail. Huh.
Yeah. So it's
I'm going to have to pay attention to that.
So when you see it again, that's who that kid is. So I'm going to make a proposition here that you guys can agree with, disagree with, talk about a little bit. And that is, I think, obviously this movie's been a culmination of all this stuff, and you don't have to be a genius to figure out why it's so huge at the box office and why people love it. But I also would go a step further and say it really is the perfect movie of the moment. Like, it is thematically exactly where we are and need to be. And that is, I think the main theme is a desire to have things that are broken put back together. I think that's kind of the deeper psychology of this movie, is like, this is a world that has been shredded, and we yearn for some kind of, to use the term redemption, some kind of restoration of that world. I think that's exactly where we are in culturally in this moment. Any thoughts about that?
I completely agree. It's the idea of kind of bringing back the good, bringing back normal, the way things were. It's the analogy of Thanos and the power and focusing on the one bad thing. But it's also, I mean, these are comic book superheroes. These are things, at least maybe in the unconscious psyche of America, this is a big deal for our culture. Notwithstanding Superman and Batman, but these are the icons of our pop culture from the 40s, 50s, 60s. And it's also even seeing the legacy of Stan Lee, and it's, I think, what America needs right now. And I'm also wondering how much people are either consciously or unconsciously experiencing a big catharsis in this movie that maybe they're not aware of what's happened to the United States.
Well, and I think you're hitting on something I want to elaborate on too, and that is, I think exactly how you said it is the reason why I think it hits on all sides of this political spectrum and cultural spectrum, is that I think on the conservative side, there's this sort of yearning for nostalgia and a sense of like, let's have things be back the way they were. And then I think on the more progressive side, there's a yearning for some things are happening that are really bad for us, culturally and morally and otherwise, and we need to move past that and get rid of, or not get rid of that, but to upend that. Emma Kate.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Where because Frank is saying, well, we want it to go back to how it was, how to bring back a sense of normalcy. But the reality is, what's happened there, you can't really ever undo what they all experience. So yes, they're bringing back the families, they're bringing back the people, but they can't ever return to the space that they were in. And now you have to move forward, and you've got to be thinking about how do we make things better and how do we make changes that are worthwhile and better for our society. And I think that's kind of the parallel where we can't go back to how things have been in our society. And so we've got to keep going forward and trying to fix whatever has happened.
But that's where I think it's, sorry to interrupt you, but that's where it feels to me like it does hit people wherever they are, because it's, in a sense, it's a projective of what everyone at the end of the day is feeling a sense of something's not right. And so I think conservatives are yearning for this nostalgic thing, like a return to something. And then progressives are looking for a progress, moving forward, a setting of things right. And it all, I think they can look at this movie through that lens, I think, and see it meeting that need of theirs to, like, the ultimate need is things aren't right. We need something to set it right. They might go about it in diametrically opposed ways, but it's the same human impulse.
Well, and I think if you, there's been 22 movies in 10 or 11 years, and that is an incredible achievement for the amount of storytelling and filming and editing. So unlike a lot of other movies, they're able to turn around a script into a film in a reasonably short amount of time, which I think has afforded them the ability to infuse into the stories more topical, relevant things that are going on. You think of Iron Man kicked it off, where it's talking about the consequences of war and profiteering off of war coming out of the Middle East conflict. You think about Winter Soldier in terms of distrust of government or organizations. You think of Civil War in terms of freedom versus, security. And then I think Black Panther, liberation theology and affluence and opening up our resources. And then here with Endgame, the big takeaway I took was, which was sort of thematically all of the Avenger films, but I think it really reached its climax here, is how we're only going to solve the world's ills if we somehow find a way to put aside or work through our differences or even our own traumas. Like, everybody in this movie has a reason to give up. Everybody's experienced loss or failure or feels like they are to blame. And I think we are in this era in our culture where we've talked about this in a number of ways of like, everybody seems very critical or calling out or super sensitive to things. And it's not that those ills or complaints are not legitimate, but at some point we have to move out of the complaining and the victim stage in order to really make systemic, real change about what's going on in our world. Otherwise, nothing changes.
Yeah, and that's the other theme in terms of how to make changes through big sacrifice. And if you look at all the sacrifices that the characters made, the Hulk, he put himself up for sacrifice. He could have died. Iron Man paid the sacrifice. What's her name? Green chick. Gamora. She gave her life for the cause.
Did you just say green chick, by the way?
Yeah,
I just
green
need
chick.
to. Okay.
And also one of my favorite scenes was when the woman who gave the stone to Doctor Strange, and how they went 5 years back, and she said, look, that hadn't even happened yet. But then she stopped and realized, wait a minute, maybe I did something I shouldn't have done and sacrificed that stone and went on faith with her sacrifice, hoping that what she was doing and what she was about to do was meaningful.
I like how Frank names most of the sacrifices that women made to make his life better in this world. So good for you there.
Well, but and I'll say this too. I think one of the themes that I keep getting from this film is just unity and oneness. And we have so much, even, just hearing Dave, when you say conservatives and liberals or progressive, like when we split apart and we kind of create these dichotomies, it just fuels the divisiveness in our society. And what I kept seeing in this film was no matter what, everybody suffers.
Yep.
Everybody did suffer. Everybody is suffering in some way, shape, or form. But they are, again, making a sacrifice, knowing, having faith in this greater good for this oneness. Like, everybody was united at the end. And it was beautiful. And I think that's what we all really want, is to just not have so much pain and suffering.
Yeah. I'm going to throw out one other angle, and there's more to talk about. We might get to it another time. But I want to throw out one other angle, and I think that you guys may disagree with me, and that would be fine. But it's really not about the movie, but people's reaction to aspects of the movie. And in line with what we're talking about how people are kind of in their own little sort of silos and all this, and we're not a unified people. What's happened is that anyone that has their own sort of personal sensitivity, that voice has been very amplified in our culture, which there's lots of really good things about that. There's lots of really cool things about people that have less power and less voice getting more voice. But to me, the criticisms that have been flung around the movie of they find Thor in this, this state where he is very schlubby, and it's like, oh, I love the movie, but they fat shamed Thor and that was bad. Or there was a gay character in a support group who, by the way, was played by the director, one of the directors. And the criticism is, oh, now you're going to have a gay character and he only has a couple lines and it's like too little too late. Or there was a scene at the end, the climactic scene where they have all the women kind of marshaling together to take the glove to, through the gauntlet, as it were. And it was criticized in some quarters as being tokenism or contrived or that kind of thing. To me, it's like, I think I'll speak to the Thor thing and the fat shaming. I mean, I look like that, but worse now, yeah,
I was wondering when you put your
but
suit
you never
on.
looked like that in the beginning.
I mean, I would love to look like Chris Hemsworth looked then, like that would be a step up, like it'd be awesome. So it's like, middle age, you get the dad bod, and I thought it was hysterically funny. Like and to me, I was grateful that there was a gay character that was represented, and I was, in a tender way, and I was grateful that they showed it's like, is there something that's the part that really, I want to have a little conversation about, is like, what are we doing here in terms of all this criticism? Is that fair criticism? Is it just like we need to get past that kind of stuff? It almost feels like we're missing a lot of the point of the movie by picking those particular things to criticize. Emma Kate?
Well, so whenever we talk about trauma, we have to remember that everybody has a different journey. And when people are more sensitive to certain specific aspects of a film, you can't help but wonder, okay, well, where are they in that? Or how has that particular piece affected them in their life? And, bringing it back to Thor, it was probably a really accurate reflection of how some people do cope. I mean, he was basically an alcoholic and he gained a lot of weight, a beer belly. And I think there's a difference between criticism versus constructive feedback. And he was used as a kind of comedic relief moment in the film. And I don't think there was necessarily anything wrong with that. But I think, again, the focus shouldn't be on how, they didn't handle this right. It should be more on just creating and fostering that dialogue where, okay, so this is how you guys chose to use that. And this is why this is what this looks like for people when they experience something. They put on a lot of weight. They cope with food. They drink alcohol. So I think it's just, again, it's kind of what you're saying. It's like the approach. How are we approaching, the dialogue around these sorts of issues?
Right. But let me ask you this, because the criticism is that it wasn't just showing, Thor's a tragic figure now because he's alcoholic and he's overweight. That's presented for comedic purposes. And that's what the criticism is. Like, you're making fun of someone because he's gained weight. I still think that's fair. I don't think that should be out of bounds, that to make that a comic device. Do you have a different view of that?
Yeah, no, I think we all have to find ways to laugh at stuff that sucks. Like, that is a true coping skill, when you can laugh at the crap that life is throwing at you. And if anything, too, I thought they did a nice job with that piece, because they didn't just show him all of a sudden going into a hardcore workout. Like, he was fat the whole time. Like, he really had to work through that. And so people were kind of on this journey with Thor, trying to figure out what to do and how to relive his life. And even at the end, showing, you know what, I don't want to be king of Asgard anymore. I'm going to let you have this, and I'm going to go find what's purposeful, meaningful for me. So I like that.
Honestly, all of that stuff that you're saying, Dave, and the trolls out there, or even the people that are criticizing the movies for this, I'm just beyond over it. Just enjoy the freaking movie and stop tearing all this stuff apart. I wonder how much of this is, okay, well, if I take this angle, I'll get some social media attention, or I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm old, but let's laugh at ourselves. Okay, yeah, everybody's nodding. Let's just, come on, people, freaking lighten up. Makes me insane.
Reason 1,127 today of things that make Frank insane. The women banding together, the gay character, I find those very insignificant little moments in the film. So to me, they don't really hold a lot of substance one way or the other, because they don't really speak to the larger film or the central characters. I think the Chris Hemsworth is something that I'm open to hearing more thoughtful or nuanced conversation. There are a couple things that I did not find it personally insensitive or offensive. But number one, I think overweight children is probably one of the first things people are bullied and singled out for and traumatized, because it's something that is very visible to a young child that is different. So I do empathize with people that felt like their entire life, and a lot of times it's not necessarily because of decisions or choices or things under their control, that they are bullied and marginalized and excluded because they are overweight or heavy. I think one of the things that some people probably would object to is not just the message, which I didn't find offensive, but the messenger. Because you think about Chris Hemsworth, overall, he is maybe one of the most physically imposing and fit people in the world. So to have that person try to be the messenger, I think some people might find more offensive, versus if you found an actor or an actress that was overweight or schlubby, I think that's the word that you use, Dave, and they make fun of themselves.
But I think was the point of the character, was that he is a Greek god, right, and now he's not. Like that's where the humor is. Yeah. Is like, it wouldn't be funny if it was just we're making fun of an overweight person.
You're juxtaposing the two ridiculous things.
Yeah, and I guess the question I would have, because again, I didn't find it particularly offensive or insensitive. It didn't take me out of the movie, because I think, like you said, that was the point of the movie. But where is that line of something that is used for comedic sense? And I don't know where that is. I don't know if we swap that out and put a gay character, their sexuality or their race, or their religious beliefs. Like, where is that line, and at what point do we say you have a point, and where's that line where it's like kind of get over it? And I'm the first one here to say I don't know where that line is.
You certainly do not.
I do not know where that line is. No.
Yeah, that is. And I think if we say we're going to have to, every film, every television show has to, and I don't want to use the word cater, but has to kind of be so dialed into every conceivable sensitivity, then we'll lose the ability to have humor as a culture. We just will. Humor is always built on an offense. It's always, sure, there's some kind of a breach or a crossing of a line. That's what makes things funny. And so if it's like, that line is not a line, that line is dynamic, it moves. But if we're like, okay, we're going to keep every possible way that someone could be offended by something, then we have very little of anything left. And what you end up with, my contention is, you end up with very banal, bland humor, or people that just don't care, and are so kind of out there and offensive that it's wrong in that way too. So,
well, I think the middle ground, and I don't know if this applies here, is for people to say, yeah, it's offensive, versus try to talk themselves out of, like, you shouldn't feel offended or sensitive about this. Like, that middle ground, if humor is built on offense, own it, versus try to say, like, you're so sensitive, which I think both sides can be true.
Yeah. I mean, there is room in that. Well, we have much more to talk about. We might be able to get to more later, but we're going to wrap it up for now. We want to ask you what you thought of the Avengers, including that spectacular ending of the whole MCU, at least this phase of it, and the ending of the movie. We want to know what you think about these themes and these ideas. So you can drop us a line at shrink_tank on Twitter, or write us an email, feedback@shrinktank.com. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Shrink Tank podcast. If you like the episode, make sure you give us a good rating on iTunes, and also tell your friends about us. We'd love for them to subscribe. It really helps us grow our podcast and reach more people. And we thank you a lot in advance. And if you're interested in more content exploring the intersection of psychology and pop culture, visit shrinktank.com. We have great articles and videos. And you can also find links to some of our recommendations that we make in other episodes. You can follow us on Twitter @shrink_tank, like us on Facebook. And for loyal listeners, make sure you listen and watch our video version of this podcast on the YouTube channel. You can search that by going to just searching Shrink Tank. You'll also see in this one me spewing water when earlier in the podcast, and Frank shushing people behind him on the podcast.
Yes.
So violently,
which
waving.
I'm sure makes great video.
Yeah.
And also, if you are watching on the YouTube channel, please hit subscribe. We'd love for you to do that. Again, for questions or comments, drop us a note. Our email is feedback@shrinktank.com. Our producer and theme music composer is Sean Beck. Our associate producer and social media guru is Mariel Butler. For Emma Kate Wright and Frank Gaskell in Charlotte, along with Jonathan Hedderly, I'm Dave Verhagen in Nashville. Tell all your friends about us and make it a great week.
Shrink Tank.